Good morning, students. In the previous class, we have already started French Revolution. We have seen the conditions of the people, how they were facing problems and why the king decided to increase the tax. After facing many unfair situations, do you think third estate people stayed quiet? No, right? There were peasants and workers who raised their voice, but they could not succeed. It was the educated and prosperous merchants who emerged as a middle-class social groups. They had the knowledge, understanding, and also was determined to seek their right. Today, we will see what caused the outbreak of the revolution. The king at that time, that is Louis XVI, had decided to increase the tax, but he alone cannot finalize it. The king did not have the power to impose tax according to his will alone. He had to call a meeting of Estates General where all the three estates had to decide together. Estates General is a legislative or consultative assembly. It was a political body to which the three estates sent their representatives. Each estate would send their representatives. This meeting earlier was done way back in 1614. On 5th May 1789, Louis XVI called together an assembly of the Estates General to pass proposals for new taxes. This kind of meeting was done after a long gap, after more than a century. It was held in a hall in Versailles. The first and second estates sent 300 representatives each, who were seated in rows facing each other on two sides, while the 600 members of the third estate had to stand at the back. The third estate was represented by its more prosperous and educated members. Peasants, artisans, and women were denied entry to the assembly. In the past, in every meeting, voting system in the Estate General was in such a manner that each estate had one vote. Louis XVI was determined to continue the same practice, but third estate members demanded that the voting should be conducted by the assembly as a whole. Everyone should participate in voting, and vote from each member or each individual would be counted as one vote. So you see, this system of vote suggested by the third estate was one of the democratic principles which was put forward by philosophers like Rousseau in his book The Social Contract. But the king rejected their proposal. When it was done so, the representatives of the third estate walked out of the meeting in anger and they began to protest. These representatives of the third estate viewed themselves as spokespersons for the whole French community. They declared it by themselves without the king's permission. On 20 June, they assembled in the hall of an indoor tennis court in the grounds of Versailles. They declared themselves a national assembly and took the pledge that they would not disperse until the constitution for France is drafted. In the constitution, powers of the monarch is limited. Also, nobles like Mirabeau and clergy like Abbé Sieyès supported and led the National Assembly. Mirabeau was convinced to remove feudal system, and Abbé Sieyès wrote an influential pamphlet called What is the Third Estate? Now, while the National Assembly was busy at Versailles drafting a constitution, the rest of France seated with turmoil. Turmoil means a situation of confusion or disturbance. Something was wrong outside. During winter season, severe cold resulted into bad harvest, due to which there was increase in the price of bread as there was less food. Bakers would also store some items and not give it to the people. Some women, they waited for very long in a queue to get the bread, but even after staying for long hours, they did not get it. they became angry and started to attack and damage the shops. This was the reason that the king ordered troops to move into Paris on 14th July. We have already discussed about this in the beginning of the chapter, where people misunderstood this and instead they stormed and destroyed the Bastille, where they killed the commander and freed the prisoner. Just as it was a false rumor that had spread and led to the destruction of Bastille, another rumor in the countryside had spread from one village to another village, that the lords of the manor means a mansion or a big house owned by the lords, the owner of the land. So the rumor spread that the lords had hired some member of a gang to destroy the ripe crops. And when the peasants heard this, they were afraid that their crops would be destroyed, and since there is a food scarcity, they would not let them do the harm. Therefore, peasants in several districts seized hoes and pitchforks and attacked Chateau. Chateau is a castle or stately residence that belonged to a king or a nobleman. Because of this incident, a large number of nobles ran away from their homes and many of them migrated to the neighboring countries. After so many ongoing revolts, finally Louis XVI had agreed to the recognition and acceptance of National Assembly, and also the principle that his powers would from now on be checked by a constitution. On the night of 4th August 1789, feudal system was abolished. Clergy gave up their birth privileges. Tithes were also abolished. And slowly there was change in the system, and Third Estate started to get some recognition. France was a fully monarchy unless the acceptance of National Assembly. How would you consider France to be after inclusion of National Assembly? France becomes a constitutional monarchy. The king had all the powers to himself before, but after accepting National Assembly, his powers were limited by the constitution. So, France still was a monarchy, but also a constitutional. The National Assembly completed the draft of the constitution in 1791. The main aims and objectives of drafting the constitution was to limit the powers of the monarch. The power to rule and take decisions was not only with the king. It was separated and assigned to different institutions, that is the legislature, executive, and judiciary. This made France a constitutional monarchy. So who proposed division of power? Who we have discussed in the first class. It was Montesquieu. Remember? Figure 7 here shows the working of the new political system under the Constitution of 1791. Today, in democracy, every citizen from the age 18 and above can vote. But was it the same case before in 18th century? Let us see what was the case earlier. There were active citizens and passive citizens. Only the active citizens were eligible to vote. It consists of men above 25 years of age who paid taxes equal to at least 3 days of a laborer's wage. Only such type of persons were eligible to vote. The remaining men and all women were classed as passive citizens. In this figure, you see there is no voting rights for the passive citizens. It also includes children. Only the active citizens can vote. They vote the judiciary and the electors. Electors consist of 50,000 men. Again, the electors vote the members of National Assembly, which has 745 members. The National Assembly controls both the minister and the king. But the king, he has got a veto power. Veto power is a power to change the final decision. The legislature is an organ of government where they make law. The executive implements and executes the law. The judiciary is the judge to check the violators and give justice or punish. Only these members could make the law. The political system of 18th century was pretty much similar to today's government, but also different in some ways. The constitution began with a declaration of the rights of man and citizen. Rights such as the right to life, freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, equality before law were established as natural and inalienable rights. That is, the natural rights belong to each human being by birth, and inalienable rights, it is those rights which could not be taken away. It was the duty of the state to protect each citizen's natural rights. Now, in this picture, you can see that this is the list of Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. It is written in French. Here, in the source C, it is translated into English. Do read this. Here, the list of rights of man and citizens are given. Now, in this box, there are different images given. Most of the men and women in the 18th century could not read or write. So, some images and symbols were used to communicate some important ideas. There are some of the symbols that were used to convey the content of Declaration of Rights. By using these symbols, one could understand the idea behind the image, or they could also use it to express their message. Moving on to our third section, that is France abolishes monarchy and becomes a republic. At first, France was completely a monarchical rule. Then it became constitutional monarchy. We saw there was an agreement between the king and the National Assembly. Now, from the title monarchy is abolished. How was it abolished? What went wrong? Let us see how it became a republic. King Louis XVI tried to recapture the political power into his hands. So, even though he had signed the constitution, he entered into a secret negotiation with the King of Prussia. Rulers of other neighboring countries also supported Louis XVI, and also Austria supported him because Marie Antoinette was a princess of Austria. They secretly planned to attack France. But before this could happen, the National Assembly came to know about it, and they voted in April 1792 and to declare war against Prussia and Austria. Thousands of volunteers across the Europe and from every corner joined the army. This war turned into a war of the people against the king and aristocracies all over Europe. While they were preparing for the war, they used to sing a patriotic song which was composed by the poet Roget de Lisle. The Revolutionary Wars brought losses and economic difficulties to the people. And while the men were fighting the war, women were taking care of the house, the living, the earning, and looking after their families by taking up different jobs. During this war, the weaker section of the population also raised their voice to get equal chance. Many political clubs were formed. Out of different clubs, the Jacobins was the most successful club. They got their name from the former convent of Saint Jacob in Paris. With this, many women were also encouraged to form their own clubs. We will discuss on this matter in the next section. So, the members of the Jacobin Club belonged mainly to the less prosperous sections of the society. They included small shopkeepers, artisans such as shoemakers, pastry cooks, watchmakers, printers, as well as servants and daily wage workers. They are mainly from the second category of the third estate. Their leader was Maximilien Robespierre. The Jacobins decided to wear long striped trousers as a dress code, as in this picture. They are known as sans culottes, which literally means those without knee breeches. They are a sans-culottes couple, and they wore these kinds of cloth to set themselves apart from the other society, and it was a way of proclaiming the end of the power of the rich and especially the nobles that would wear knee breeches. The sans-culottes men wore red cap that symbolized liberty, meaning freedom, but the women were not allowed to wear the red cap. Now let us see what changes did Jacobins Club bring. In the summer of 1792, the people of Paris again faced food scarcity. Jacobins planned to revolt along with the angry Parisians. On the morning of August 10, they stormed the palace of the Tuileries, massacred the king's guard, and held the king himself a hostage for several hours. The royal family was imprisoned. New elections were also held, and they also changed the eligibility criteria to vote from the age 25 years into 21 years. From then, any individual, regardless of wealth, whether they pay tax or not, rich or poor, everybody from the age 21 years and above got the right to vote. After National Assembly, there was a newly elected assembly called Convention. On 21st September 1792, monarchy was abolished and France was declared as a republic. So France was no longer a monarchy. It was a republic, a form of government where the people elects the government. As Louis XVI backstabbed and betrayed its nation, he was charged with treason and was sentenced to death by the court. On 21 January 1793, he was hanged in front of the public at the Place de la Concorde. And after some time, Queen Marie Antoinette was also punished in the same way as Louis XVI. Now let us see what is the Reign of Terror. The period from 1793 to 1794 is referred to as the Reign of Terror. The leader of Jacobins followed a strict and severe control and punishment. All of his enemies, whether it was the ex-nobles and clergy, members of other political parties, or even the member of his own party that would not agree with him and go against, were arrested, imprisoned, and put into trial into the court. If any of them were found guilty, they were guillotined. The guillotine is a device consisting of two poles and a blade with which a person is beheaded. It was named after Dr. Guillotin, who invented it. By this method, one would not feel the pain and would die instantly. Robespierre tried to maintain equality among people. He issued a law placing a maximum ceiling on wages and prices. It means fixation of price and wages, where the price won't be too high. Meat and bread were rationed. Peasants were forced to transport their grain to the cities and sell it at prices fixed by the government. The use of more expensive white flour was forbidden as it was used by the rich. So, to maintain equality, all citizens were required to eat the equality bread, a loaf made of wheat. Equality was also sought to be practiced through forms of speech and address. Instead of addressing themselves as Sir and Madam, they were to address themselves as Citoyen and Citoyenne. That means the citizen, which is common for all. Churches were also shut down and their buildings were converted into barracks or offices. This strictness in his policies began to suffocate people, and that even his supporters went against him and began to demand moderation, to be more flexible in its rule. He was finally convicted by a court in July 1794, arrested, and on the next day itself, he was sent to guillotine. In the following subsection, we will look at the Directory rules of France. The fall of the Jacobin government after Robespierre was guillotined, it gave away and allowed the wealthier middle classes to seize power. They got the chance to come to power. They introduced a new constitution in which the one who did not have any property cannot vote. See, here again the voting system had been changed. Non-propertied sections of society cannot vote. This new constitution appointed a directory and executive made up of 5 members. Earlier the executive was the king, and it was abolished, after which Jacobins took over and they exercised power in one man, that is their leader. Because of his rule, the directory of 5 members were created, but they often clashed with the legislative councils, who then was dismissed. This instability in political system of government gave the way for the rise of a military dictator, Napoleon Bonaparte. We will learn more about Napoleon by the end of this chapter. Now, let us quickly highlight whatever we have studied so far. France had a rule of monarch. There was 3 estates. First, clergy, that is the church, priest and other church members. Second, the nobility, the nobles such as the king and every member of the royalty. Third, all the other population, but again it was categorized into 3. First category was of the educated and the traders. Second category was peasants and artisans. Third were the small peasants, landless laborers and servants. Only third estates had to pay taxes, which was unfair. Because of the financial crisis, the king had to increase the taxes. This increase in taxes and the food scarcity made the third estate to raise their voice. The less prosperous had started raising voice, but they failed. It was the higher prosperous one, that is the educated and the traders, who emerged as the middle class, strongly raised their voices, and the 3 philosophers, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Montesquieu, had a huge contribution in the idea of understanding their right and how the government should be exercised. The first political body, General Estates, it had a voting system of the 1 vote by each estate, which made third estate representative to demand for each member of the assembly as a whole would have 1 vote. The king rejected it, and National Assembly was formed, which later was accepted by King Louis XVI and hence formed constitutional monarchy. Here the active citizens above 25 years of age are eligible to vote. But the betrayal of Louis XVI led to a war, and during this war there emerged a political club, Jacobins Club. Under the rule of the leader of Jacobins in the election, all the men of 21 years and above, regardless of wealth, got the right to vote. But again, after the fall of Jacobins, the directory rule was applied in France. They made a new constitution where non-propertied sections of society were not allowed to vote. These changes and instability of government gave a way to the military dictator Napoleon Bonaparte to take over. Through all these changes in the form of government, the ideals of freedom, of equality before the law, and of fraternity remained inspiring ideals that motivated political movements in France and the rest of Europe during the following century. History is a vast subject, so for better understanding, read the chapter thoroughly and try to understand the concept. So today we will end the class here, and rest of the topic we will discuss in the next class. Thank you.